Hello everyone, this is Yoko. On this channel, I'll be sharing information in English that I've gathered because events happening in China often don't get reported in other countries. I receive information from multiple sources, so I'd appreciate your comments on the content of the videos. If you enjoy the content, please subscribe to the channel and show your support. So, what happened this time is, roughly speaking, the Beijing Finance Department issued a certain directive to the finance departments across China under the tax collection policy. This reflects Beijing's government recognizing the need to address current issues in China. Regardless of how you put it, the point is that Chinese society is in its current state, and that's what this is about. Therefore, this time, I'd like to introduce the details of this matter. There are many articles in Chinese about this issue. One example is this one. At the end of the article's title, it mentions 3 steps. What this means is that the Beijing Finance Department has demanded that various regions in China adhere to 3 specific points. However, when we say adhere, it's a bit different from the nuance in Japanese. If we translate it more forcefully, it's like Beijing instructing various regions in China to staunchly uphold these 3 points. So, what are these 3 points? The article lists them all in the title. One is basic welfare, which in Japanese might be better described as ensuring the minimum standard of living. The next 2 characters represent wages or salaries. Then, there's the character, hey, which, in Chinese, means and. So, the next 2 signify maintaining the government's functions. I think it means ensuring that the government functions don't come to a halt. Even in Japan, there's a growing awareness of the challenges facing the Chinese economy. However, I don't think many people realize how dire the situation is, especially regarding people's livelihoods and salaries. The fact that Beijing is instructing local governments to ensure citizens' livelihoods and salaries means that the situation in China is much worse than what most Japanese people might think. In other words, there are many people who can't sustain their livelihoods, and many who aren't getting paid their salaries properly. Furthermore, some government functions are stagnating or stopping altogether. I've mentioned before on this channel about issues like the operation of public transportation in local areas, such as buses being stopped because drivers aren't being paid. Probably, there are other similar problems happening elsewhere, where some functions of local governments are stagnating or stopping. So, Beijing is telling them to get those things back on track. Of course, if people aren't getting paid, various problems arise. The Chinese economy is already in decline, and if this isn't addressed, it could suffer irreparable damage. This is a significant issue in Chinese society. Currently, the unemployment rate among young people in China is very high, and this is not a temporary problem. When young people can't find jobs, they can't develop job skills. So, even if the economy improves slightly in the future, these people won't have the skills needed. For example, if someone has only been doing food delivery, suddenly telling them to get a job using a computer would be difficult for them. Therefore, the increase in young unemployment leaves significant issues for the future. So, China is at a critical juncture. They need to do something about the economy and reduce the unemployment rate among young people. However, if salaries aren't being paid, it's a negative for the economy. If people aren't getting paid, they'll try to save as much as possible, and if they hear about others not getting paid, they become cautious too because it could happen to them. This leads to decreased consumption, further worsening the Chinese economy in a negative spiral. So, it's bad if this feeling of anxiety spreads. Hence, what the Communist Party is saying is, pay your salaries properly. And if many people can't sustain their livelihoods, it's negative for the economy, and it could lead to deteriorating public order. China is facing these problems, so they need to address them. They're basically telling local governments to come up with concrete measures to ensure welfare, pay salaries, and maintain government functions. Just hearing this, you might think the Communist Party is keeping an eye on Chinese society and considering the people's livelihoods. However, here's where it gets crucial. The Chinese Communist Party often talks about doing good things, but they've never actually delivered on the promised results. The reason I can say this is because of the 3 steps I mentioned earlier, which were announced as far back as 2010. Even after over 10 years, they've been instructing local governments to establish systems to ensure that ordinary people receive their salaries properly. So why do they keep saying the same thing? It's because there are still many people working but not getting paid. This has been going on for years, and whenever Chinese companies face financial difficulties, employees often end up not getting paid. It's become accepted as a norm. So, despite the Chinese Communist Party claiming to do good things from Beijing, they haven't actually done anything about it. China has been saying the same things for over a decade without any improvement. As the decline of the Chinese economy begins, they're scrambling, but now Chinese companies are also running out of resources. Even if they start talking about things like welfare and ensuring salaries, the reality is that the lives of ordinary people are likely to become even tougher than before. In China, protests by employees demanding their unpaid wages have been frequent for years. For example, workers at construction sites may gather because they haven't been paid, and this is not uncommon in China. Until now, when disturbances got too big, the police would come in and remove the protesters, or sometimes even dark forces would come in and remove them. This was quite common even when China's economy was said to be doing well. I think the Communist Party tries to control information so it doesn't spread, but the fact that information is still getting out on the internet suggests that there are so many protests about unpaid wages that it's impossible to hide everything. And now, as the Chinese economy worsens, more and more people will find themselves not getting paid, which will temporarily provoke protests against companies. If the government tries to suppress these protests, it could lead to clashes between the police and the people. I believe the Communist Party regime fears such a situation, but as long as the Chinese economy doesn't improve, this risk will only grow, and that's the reality of China today. That's all for this time. See you next time.